Daniel had worked at the community theater for almost 3 years, and most days felt exactly the same. He arrived just as the sun went down, pushed open the back door that always squeaked, and walked into the cool, empty building with his old backpack over his shoulder. Inside that backpack were a few simple things: a sandwich, a small thermos of tea, and a picture his daughter had drawn of the two of them standing in front of a piano. She had given it to him years ago, and the paper was a little wrinkled now, but he carried it every day because it reminded him of who he was. Before life changed, most people who passed through the theater hardly noticed him. They saw a quiet man with tired eyes and a mop in his hand, someone who cleaned up popcorn after shows and stacked chairs when events ended. He never complained, never stepped out of line, and never asked for anything. But behind that quiet face was a man who carried much more than a bucket and broom. He carried memories, some beautiful, some painful, and he tried to keep them tucked away, just like the picture in his backpack. Every night after finishing homework, his 10-year-old daughter, Lily, sat in the back corner of the theater while he worked. She was the only reason he kept moving, even on the hardest days. She was small, gentle, and full of questions about everything she saw. She loved watching the rehearsals when the theater allowed it. Sometimes she peeked through the curtains when dancers practiced or when the youth orchestra held their sessions. She loved the sound of music, and sometimes, when she looked at the piano on stage, she gave her dad that curious look, the one that said she knew he was hiding something. Daniel always pretended not to notice. That evening started like any other. The youth showcase group had just finished their rehearsal. The kids rushed out of the building in clusters, laughing loudly, dragging violin cases behind them. Parents gathered their coats, water bottles, and half-eaten snacks. The director shouted a reminder about arrival times for the weekend performance. Chairs scraped, doors slammed, and then slowly, the whole place fell into silence. Silence, Daniel's favorite moment of the night. He stepped onto the stage with his broom, sweeping away glitter someone had spilled and wiping up a small puddle left by a tipped water bottle. The stage lights above hummed softly, giving the room a warm golden glow. The air smelled faintly of dust and old costumes tucked away backstage. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, and for a moment, he forgot how exhausted he was. Lily walked onto the stage and sat near the piano, swinging her legs gently. She always stayed close, as if the theater itself felt too big to face alone. She didn't say much at first, just watched him as he moved, her chin resting on her knees. "Dad," she said after a while, her voice soft, "do you ever get bored of cleaning the stage?" Daniel paused and leaned on the broom handle. "Not really," he said. "It's quiet work. And quiet isn't always bad. But you're always here when everyone else leaves," she said. "Doesn't that feel lonely?" He smiled a little. "Not when you're here." She grinned at that answer, but her eyes drifted back to the piano. The glossy black instrument sat under a dim light, looking almost like it was waiting for someone. "Dad," she said again, "you used to play, right?" Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. That question again. She had asked it many times, and every time he found a simple way to dodge it. "A little," he said. "A long time ago. Why don't you play anymore?" He looked down at the floor, pushing the broom slowly. He didn't like lying to her, but telling the truth felt too heavy. Music had once been the center of his life. He had played at competitions, small concerts, school recitals, and then he stopped. The day his wife passed, everything that used to be bright suddenly became too loud, too sharp, too painful. Music became a reminder of everything he lost. Life got busy. He finally said that Lily didn't look satisfied. She placed her palms on the piano lid. "Can you show me sometime?" "Just once?" Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but a voice from the lobby echoed, breaking the moment. "Hey, Daniel, we're heading out. Lock up when you're done." It was the event coordinator waving as she walked out with a group of parents. Daniel gave a nod, and they disappeared out the door. The theater was officially empty. He continued sweeping while Lily hummed quietly beside the piano, tapping a few keys with her fingertips. Her humming drifted through the room like a small melody trying to fill the silence. "You know," Daniel said gently, "you should be doing your homework now." "I already finished," she said. "All of it?" "Yes." She gave him a proud smile. He raised an eyebrow, pretending to be suspicious, but he knew she was telling the truth. She was responsible, more responsible than some adults he knew. She understood how hard he worked, and always tried to make things easier for him. Daniel put the broom aside and wiped his hands on his work pants. His back ached slightly from bending over, but he kept going. He always kept going. That was what life demanded of him now. Lily suddenly asked, "Do you like working here?" Daniel thought for a moment. "It's not my dream job," he admitted softly, "but it helps us. And sometimes that's what matters." She nodded slowly, though her eyes showed she was thinking deeply. After a few quiet minutes, she slid off the bench and wandered across the stage, running her fingers along the dusty curtains. Daniel watched her with a gentle smile. She was so full of energy and wonder, a complete opposite of his quiet, cautious nature. "Can I sit at the piano?" she asked. "You can sit," he said, "but don't hit the keys too hard. I don't want you damaging anything." She hopped onto the bench and lifted the fallboard. Her fingers touched the keys lightly, like she was afraid they would break. She pressed one, then another, letting the sound echo softly. "It's so pretty," she whispered. Daniel nodded, but didn't step any closer. Instead, he walked to the side of the stage to pick up a dustpan. But as he did, he caught himself glancing at the piano, something he hadn't allowed himself to do for a long time. It felt strange, like seeing an old friend he had avoided. The memories returned whether he wanted them to or not. Sitting at a different piano years ago, feeling confident, feeling alive. The applause, the stage lights, the way his heart once belonged to music. And then the image of his wife's smile appeared in his mind, a smile that used to calm him before every performance. He blinked hard and looked away. "Dad," Lily said suddenly, "can you teach me one note?" "Just one." Daniel shook his head gently. "Not tonight, sweetheart." "Why not?" she said. "You always say—" He cut her off softly. "Because I'm working, and we need to go home soon." She pressed her lips together, clearly disappointed. But she didn't argue. She respected him too much for that, and he appreciated it more than she knew. He swept the last of the glitter into the dustpan and glanced around the empty room, making sure everything was in place. But his eyes kept drifting back to the piano as though something inside him was calling. Lily's voice softened into a whisper. "I just wish I could hear you play." Daniel's heart squeezed. He wished he could explain everything to her. Why he stopped, why it hurt, why he couldn't bring himself to touch those keys again. But the words always stuck. He walked to the piano, not to play, but to gently close the fallboard. "Someday," he said. Her eyes lit up with hope. Even if he didn't mean soon. The theater felt especially quiet now. The kind of quiet that made a person reflect on things they tried to forget. Daniel turned off a few more lights, leaving just the warm glow above the stage. He grabbed his broom and backpack, preparing to leave. Lily hopped off the bench and walked beside him. Slipping her small hand into his. He squeezed it gently. He didn't know it yet. But this ordinary night, this night that felt like every other, was about to become the beginning of something he never expected. Something that would pull him back to the part of himself he abandoned long ago. For now, though, he simply walked with his daughter through the quiet theater, unaware that the stage he had cleaned for years was waiting for him to step into the light again. The next evening came quietly, just like all the others, but there was something different in the air, even if Daniel didn't notice it at first. He arrived at the community theater with his usual slow, steady steps, his backpack hanging from one shoulder and his keys dangling in his hand. The sun had already dipped behind the buildings, leaving the sky painted in shades of deep orange and fading blue. Lily walked beside him, holding on to the strap of her small school bag. She looked cheerful, as she always did after school, but Daniel sensed something bubbling beneath her smile, something she wasn't saying out loud. She glanced toward the theater doors again and again, almost like she couldn't wait to step inside. He unlocked the door, pushed it open, and the familiar smell of old wood and stage curtains filled the air. The building was quiet. The youth group had finished earlier, so only a few staff members were still gathering their belongings. The moment they stepped inside, Lily broke into a small skip, letting her shoes tap gently against the floor. "Someone's excited," Daniel said. "I just like being here," she replied quickly. But her voice carried the tone of someone who wasn't telling the whole truth. Daniel didn't push. He rarely did. He let her have her little secrets. He walked toward the storage closet backstage where the cleaning supplies were kept. The mop, broom, and cleaning cart waited exactly where he left them the night before. When he pulled the cart out, its wheels squeaked loudly, echoing across the street. Lily stood at the edge of the stage, already looking toward the piano, even though she tried not to be obvious about it. "Don't even think about it yet," Daniel said with a small chuckle. She stuck her tongue out playfully. "I wasn't going to touch it. I was just looking." He shook his head, amused, and pushed the cart onto the stage. Tonight's job was a bit heavier. A dance group had used the space earlier, and there were scuff marks everywhere. Glitter again. A jacket someone forgot. A water bottle rolling around near the front row. He started his routine sweeping, wiping, collecting loose items, while Lily settled herself on the edge of the stage and began doing her homework. Every now and then, he caught her humming softly. It was the same tune she had hummed the night before, though he didn't recognize it. About half an hour passed quietly. Everything seemed normal, but inside Daniel's chest, something felt unsettled, like a memory trying to crawl upward. He tried to ignore it. He focused on cleaning. But somehow, even while he worked, his eyes kept drifting toward the piano dot. It stood there under the soft overhead light. The lid closed, its polished surface reflecting a faint glow. It looked like it was waiting, and that thought made him uneasy. Instruments didn't wait for people. They didn't care who touched them. They didn't care who avoided them. But that piano felt different. It felt familiar. He rubbed his hands on his pants and tried to focus again. Lily, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly set down her pencil and walked toward the piano. "Can I sit?" she asked. He sighed. "Sit, yes. Play, no. Same rule as yesterday." She smiled and slid onto the bench. The wooden seat creaked slightly under her weight. She lifted the fallboard just enough to see the keys and pressed one gently. The note rang out, soft and clean. "Lily." "That was an accident," she said quickly, though the sparkle in her eyes told him it wasn't. He shook his head again. "If anyone asks who played that key, tell them it was one of the theater ghosts." She laughed out, loud, bright, clear, and so full of joy that Daniel couldn't help but smile. He moved to the wings of the stage to clean up some props left from rehearsal. While doing so, he felt the same tugging feeling in his chest. It was faint but steady, like a memory tapping the inside of his mind. He could almost hear music, not from Lily. No, from somewhere deep inside him. The last time he played a full piece on a stage felt like another lifetime. Back when life was simpler, when he wasn't carrying the weight of raising a child alone. back when his dreams felt possible. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he remembered the warmth of stage lights, the sound of applause, his wife's gentle voice telling him he was doing great. He opened his eyes quickly, pushing the memory back down where it came from. Dad? Lily's voice broke the silence. He blinked, realizing he had been standing still for several seconds. You okay? She asked. Yes, he said, nodding. Just tired. She studied him for a moment, as if she didn't fully believe him, then turned her attention back to the piano. Can I show you something? She asked. What is it? She pressed 3 keys, one after the other, creating a small, clumsy pattern. Does that sound like a song? She asked hopefully. He chuckled. Not yet, but maybe one day. She shrugged, not discouraged at all. I like the way it sounds, even if it's not a real song. He walked over to her and gently lowered the fallboard. Be careful with it, he said. She nodded, but her eyes were still filled with curiosity. Why do you always close it so fast? She asked. He hesitated. Because it's not ours, and I don't want us touching things we shouldn't. But they both knew that wasn't the real reason. Lily stood up and went back to her homework, leaving the piano sitting quietly on the stage again. Daniel went back to cleaning, trying to stay busy. But everything he did tonight felt slower, heavier, like his thoughts were stuck in places he didn't want to. Revisit. He kept seeing his wife's face. He kept remembering how her hands felt when she would rest them on his shoulders before a performance. He kept hearing her last words about music, words he wished he could forget and remember at the same time. When he finished sweeping the last corner of the stage, he sat down at the edge for a moment to catch his breath. His knees ached a little from bending. His hands were dry from cleaning products. He felt older than he really was. Lily walked over and sat beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder. It's warm here, she whispered. Yes, he said softly. The lights make it warm. She stayed close to him for a while, silent and calm. He appreciated moments like this more than anything. They were rare now. She was growing fast, and one day she wouldn't sit with him like this anymore. Dad? She asked after a few minutes. Yes? If someone can do something beautiful, should they hide it? His chest tightened again. Where did that come from? He asked quietly. She shrugged. Just thinking. He turned his face slightly toward her. What kind of beautiful thing? Anything. Like drawing, singing, dancing. Her voice softened. Playing music. He swallowed. Sometimes people stop doing things. Not because they don't love them anymore, but because life changes. But if they still can do it, she whispered. Shouldn't they try again? He didn't answer right away. His voice felt stuck in his throat. Finally, he said, Maybe, but everyone has their own reasons for stopping. She nodded, but didn't seem satisfied. The stage lights flickered slightly, signaling that most of the building had been shut down. Daniel took it as a sign to finish up. Come on, he said gently. Pack up. We should go home. Lily gathered her things and walked toward the dressing room area to grab her jacket. Daniel stood, stretched his back, and let out a tired breath. His eyes drifted to the piano once more. He stared at it for a long moment. Something inside him, something he had been ignoring for years, felt like it was slowly waking up. He took a step toward the piano. Then another. He stood in front of it, resting his fingers lightly on the closed lid. It felt cool under his skin. His heart thudded once. Hard. He closed his eyes. He knew exactly what the keys would feel like, exactly what the first note would sound like. His fingers twitched. He lifted the fallboard slowly, hearing the soft click it made as it opened. The white and black keys stared back at him. His breath trembled. He placed one finger on a key. He didn't press down. He couldn't. Not yet. Dad? Lily called from backstage. He quickly let go of the key and lowered the lid halfway, stepping back from the piano like he had been caught doing something wrong. Yes? He answered, his voice slightly unsteady. I'm ready. She called. He cleared his throat. Coming. Het closed the fallboard all the way and stared at the piano for a few more seconds. Maybe. She was right, Dot. Maybe he shouldn't hide something. Just because it hurt to remember Dot, but he wasn't. Ready to face it, yet, Dot, not tonight. He grabbed his backpack, turned off the last stage light, and walked toward Lily. The theater fell into darkness behind him. He didn't see it, but the faint reflection of the piano remained glowing from the hallway light, like it was waiting for him to return. The following day, Daniel felt strangely distracted. All morning at home, he found himself thinking about the piano at the theater. He tried to push the thought away, but it kept returning like a small wave, washing over the same spot on the shore again and again. When he sat at the kitchen table to drink his tea, he imagined the weight of the piano keys beneath his fingers. When he washed the dishes, he thought about the soft echo of a single note in an empty room. Even while walking Lily to school, the memory of standing so close to the piano last night stayed with him. He shook his head more than once, telling himself it didn't matter. It was just a piano, just an instrument, just a thing made of wood and strings. But deep inside, he knew it wasn't that simple. Dot. By the time he finished his errands and grabbed a quick lunch, he realized he had spent most of the day lost in his thoughts. He had never been so distracted before a work shift. Usually his mind stayed focused, steady, organized. But today, he felt like a part of him was trying to pull him in a direction he hadn't allowed himself to go in years. When it was finally time to leave for work, Lily walked beside him with her usual cheerful steps. She seemed to be humming again, the same tune from the past 2 days. He wondered where she learned it. Maybe from school, maybe from something she heard during rehearsals at the theater. But the melody had a familiar shape to it. Something about it reminded him of songs he used to play. Dot. As they approached the theater building, Lily suddenly spoke. Do you think someone will be practicing today? Probably, Daniel replied. There's always someone practicing in this place. She nodded as if that answer pleased her. Then she asked, do you think they'll play the piano? He gave her a sideways look. Why are you so interested in the piano all of a sudden? I don't know, she said, but her voice carried a hint of mischief. I just like listening to it. He didn't push further. He didn't have the energy to dig into her reasons, especially when he wasn't even ready to face his own. When they stepped inside the building, it was quieter than usual. The halls echoed with their footsteps. The youth group wasn't scheduled tonight, and the dance class had been canceled because the instructor was sick. Only a few people from the staff were scattered around the lobby, packing up equipment or organizing flyers. Daniel pushed the cleaning cart onto the stage, and as always, Lily followed him. But unlike other nights, she climbed onto the stage and looked around with wide eyes, as if something special was about to happen. He frowned slightly. You're in a strange mood today. She grinned. Maybe. He didn't know what she was planning, but he knew that look. Lily had a quiet way of nudging him into moments he didn't expect. He got to work. There were footprints on the stage left by the earlier staff meeting, some papers scattered near the edge, and a few props that needed organizing. As he swept, Lily wandered to the front row and sat down, facing him like she was an audience member waiting for a show. He raised an eyebrow. What are you doing over there? Watching, she said simply. Watching what? You. He laughed softly. There's nothing to watch. I'm just cleaning. Still watching, she said as she swung her legs. He shook his head, amused, and kept working. The theater remained quiet. Unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that made the smallest sounds feel louder than they really were. The sweep of the broom, the creak of the cleaning cart, the soft thud of Lily's shoes tapping the seat. And then, as if the room itself was calling his attention, his eyes drifted toward the piano. The overhead stage lights were slightly dim tonight, leaving the piano lit in a soft, warm glow that made it look almost magical. The polished top reflected the stage lights like a gentle shimmer. It stood there untouched, peaceful. He felt something in his chest. A small tug. Strong, but steady. Lily watched him closely. After a few minutes, she hopped onto the stage again and walked straight to the piano. "Can I sit here tonight?" she asked. "You can sit," he said. "But remember the rule. Don't play unless you say so," she replied. "Exactly." She lowered herself onto the bench with a soft sigh, like she was settling into her favorite spot. She placed her hands in her lap instead of reaching for the keys this time. Daniel continued sweeping, though his focus kept slipping. With every pass of the broom, his eyes flickered toward the piano. His heart beat a little faster than usual, though he couldn't explain why. Lily suddenly spoke, her voice gentle. "You know, it's okay to miss something." Daniel paused. He didn't look at her, but he felt the weight of her words. "I don't know what you mean," he said quietly. She tilted her head. "You don't? Really?" He stared at the broom. "Cleaning keeps me busy. That's what matters." "But busy isn't the same as happy," she whispered. He froze. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. He finally said, "Happiness isn't always an option. Sometimes we do what we have to do." She studied him carefully. "Does it make you sad to see the piano?" He swallowed hard. "No, I'm fine." She didn't believe him. He could see it in the way her eyes softened. "Dad, you don't have to pretend." He stopped sweeping and leaned on the broom handle. The truth was sitting right in front of him in the shape of a piano. For years, he had avoided everything that reminded him of the person he used to be. But now, with Lily watching him, he felt exposed. The air in the theater felt thicker. He walked toward the piano slowly. His steps were quiet, almost hesitant. Lily watched every one of them. When he reached the piano, he placed his hand on the lid. The wood was warm from the stage lights. He opened the lid, halfway. Then all the way. The keys stared back at him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lily whispered, "You can play if you want." He breathed out slowly. "I don't know if I can." She tilted her head. "Why not?" "It's been a long time," he said softly. "A long time doesn't mean you forgot," she replied. He looked at her, and her gentle confidence shook something inside him. He sat down on the bench. The wooden seat felt different than the benches he used long ago, stiffer, colder but familiar in its own way. He placed his hands above the keys without touching them. A long silence filled the room. He could hear the faint hum of the stage lights, the soft rustle of Lily's clothes as she leaned closer, and the beating of his own heart. He took a deep breath, and then he pressed a key. One single note. It echoed beautifully through the theater, gentle, clear, warm. Lily's eyes widened. He pressed another, then another. Slowly, his fingers began to move in a small, simple pattern. Nothing complicated, nothing dramatic. Just a soft progression that flowed from one note to the next like a quiet river. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing steadied. The room felt different, as if the walls themselves leaned into. "Listen." Lily stepped closer, her face glowing with awe. "You remember?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He just played. For a moment, he forgot about the years of silence. He forgot about the pain, the loss, the weight he carried every day. The music flowed from his hands naturally, effortlessly. like a language he had spoken since childhood. He wasn't playing a real song, not yet. He was just letting his fingers search, explore, rediscover. But even this small moment felt powerful. Then, suddenly, a soft creaking sound came from the back of the theater. Daniel froze. He lifted his hands from the keys instantly, his heart jumping. Lily turned around. Someone was standing near the doorway, a woman with a coat draped over her arm, holding a clipboard. The event coordinator? She hadn't spoken yet. She was just watching them. Daniel's heart thudded painfully. He stood up abruptly, his face flushing. I was just... The woman raised her hand gently. It's okay, she said softly. Her tone wasn't angry. It wasn't scolding. It was surprised. And impressed. Daniel didn't know what to say. His throat felt tight. I didn't mean to. I shouldn't have touched. It sounded beautiful, she said simply. Lily stepped closer to her dad, her small hand brushing against his. The coordinator walked slowly down the aisle toward the stage. I didn't know you played, she said, her voice warm. He swallowed. I used to. A long time ago. Well, you still do, she replied with a gentle smile. Daniel felt overwhelmed, embarrassed, exposed, but also something else. Something quiet, something like pride. Lily tugged his sleeve and whispered, See? I told you. The coordinator stepped onto the stage. Daniel, she said softly, would you mind playing something again? He froze. But before he could answer, Lily whispered, Please, Dad? Her voice was full of hope, not full of love, full of belief. He looked at her. Then at the piano. And for the first time in years, he didn't run away from the keys. The moment the sound of the piano drifted through the empty theater, something seemed to shift in the air. It was gentle at first, soft like a whisper, as if someone was cautiously testing the keys to see whether they still remembered him. But the melody soon grew fuller, warmer, and more confident. It wrapped itself around the room like a memory waking from a long sleep. A few minutes earlier, the building had been nearly silent. The youth showcase rehearsal had ended. The last group of students had rushed out, and the coordinator had turned off most of the lights before locking up the front area. Only a few dim bulbs remained near the backstage hallway, the kind always left on for safety. But even in that quiet, something unexpected was beginning to happen. At the far end of the theater, two parents walked back in through the side door. One of them had forgotten a bag. The other was simply keeping them company. They were halfway down the aisle when they stopped, puzzled. They exchanged a look, confused by the music flowing toward them. Is someone still practicing? One whispered, I thought everyone left. The other murmured. They stepped forward slowly, their footsteps quiet on the carpet. The closer they came, the clearer the melody grew, full of emotion, but controlled, shaped by hands that clearly knew the piano well. It wasn't the messy playing of a distracted student, or someone testing out notes just for fun. This was something entirely different. The two parents stood there for a moment, frozen by the unexpected beauty of it. Then one of them peeked around the curtains. Their eyes widened. There, sitting on the piano bench as if he belonged there all along, was the quiet janitor, still in his work shirt, sleeves rolled up, face calm but focused. His daughter sat off to the side, legs crossed, chin resting on her knees, as she watched him with a soft smile. The parents stepped back, whispering, It's him, the man who cleans the stage. The other blinked. Trying to process that. They lingered there, listening, not wanting to interrupt. After a moment, they waved over another parent who had wandered in looking for their lost phone. That parent froze too, stunned by the sight and sound. Soon, whispers spread among the small group that had returned to collect items. They gathered quietly at the entrance to the stage area, careful not to break the spell. No one wanted to startle the man at the piano. No one wanted the music to stop. And so, without planning it, an audience began to form. The coordinator, who had been finishing paperwork in a side office, stepped out to check if the lights had been turned off. She paused instantly when she heard the piano. Her eyebrows lifted, and she followed the sound toward the main theater, expecting to find a student lingering. But as soon as she saw the small group gathered behind the curtain, she knew something unexpected was happening. She moved closer. Joining them silently. Inside, Daniel played on, unaware of the eyes watching him. At first, his hands were slightly tense, as though he wasn't sure if he had the right to take up space on that stage. But as the piece unfolded, his fingers began to glide more freely. His posture relaxed. The music deepened. He wasn't playing for an audience. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was playing because his daughter had encouraged him. Because his hands remembered an old language he rarely allowed himself to speak. And because, for the first time in a long while, he felt safe enough to let that part of himself out again. The notes rose and fell in patterns that hinted at joy, sadness, and years of unspoken stories. Every chord felt like a breath he had been holding for far too long. Lily watched him closely, her eyes soft with understanding. She knew more than anyone how much he had carried alone. The audience behind the curtain didn't dare interrupt. Some stood with their hands clasped, others with their backs pressed gently against the walls, almost as if they feared stepping too close might break. Whatever magic was happening, someone lifted their phone and began recording, not out of excitement, but out of a feeling that something real, something deeply human, was unfolding right in front of them. The coordinator glanced around, then quietly reached for the small lighting panel at the side of the curtain. She pressed a button that brightened the soft stage bulbs just slightly, not enough to expose him, just enough to cradle the piano area in a warm glow. It gave the scene a gentle, intimate feel. Still, Daniel continued unaware. He was far away in his own memories, sitting at a competition years ago. His wife in the audience, smiling proudly, his nerves turning into passion the moment he began to play. He remembered late nights practicing while she hummed along. He remembered the day everything changed, when music suddenly felt too heavy, too connected to a life he wasn't sure he could touch anymore. And yet here he was again, fingers moving like they had been waiting for this moment. After several minutes, the melody shifted into something more hopeful, like a sunrise slowly brightening after a long night. A few parents exchanged glances, their eyes glistening. Some felt a lump in their throat and didn't fully understand why. Maybe it was the sincerity of the moment. Maybe it was the contrast, the worn work boots on the floor beneath the bench, the cleaning rag left beside the piano leg, the man who spent his nights sweeping the very stage he was now filling with music. Whatever it was, it touched people. Slowly, without anyone saying a word, more people slipped in. A group of teens who had forgotten a backpack returned and joined the growing cluster. A couple of kids peeked in and were immediately hushed by their parents so the music wouldn't be disturbed. Even the air felt different still. Warm, expectant. Then, as if the world wanted to hold its breath with him. Everything fell silent for just a second when the piece reached a pause. Daniel lifted his fingers lightly above the keys. Eyes closed. Then he released the final notes. They rang out clear and full, drifting across the theater before settling softly into the quiet. He took in a slow breath, letting the moment pass through him. Then something made him open his eyes. At first, he didn't understand. He expected to see only Lily sitting beside him, smiling shyly. Instead, he saw shapes, figures, people. Dozens of them. His body tensed instantly. His hands hovered awkwardly over the keys. There was complete silence for a single heartbeat. And then the applause began. It didn't start with one person. It started with many, like everyone had been waiting for the first move, but didn't want to be the one to break the spell. They clapped quietly at first, then louder as they stepped out from behind the curtains and into his view. Daniel's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. He stood up quickly, almost knocking the bench back. I'm sorry," he blurted, his voice cracking. "I didn't know anyone was here." But no one seemed to want an apology. Lily ran to him, taking his hand. "Dad, it's okay," she whispered with a proud smile. The coordinator came forward with a warm expression. "You don't need to be sorry," she said gently. That was beautiful. A few parents nodded, still looking amazed. Others simply smiled in quiet respect. Daniel didn't know what to say. He felt exposed, embarrassed, and touched all at the same time. He tried to explain that he was only cleaning, that he hadn't meant to disturb anyone. But every attempt was drowned out by more praise. He stood there in disbelief as people thanked him, told him how much the music moved them, how they hadn't expected such a performance from someone they'd seen sweeping floors night after night. It was overwhelming. But in a strangely gentle way, he looked at Lily again. She squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with pride. And in that moment, despite his confusion, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years, a small spark of possibility. Soft but unmistakably real. The night that began with cleaning had turned into something he never saw coming. When the last notes faded into the air, Daniel felt the quiet settle around him like a blanket he wasn't ready for. He didn't know people had gathered. He didn't know anyone had been listening. He didn't even know how long he had been playing. All he knew was that, for the first time in years, the music had taken him somewhere he thought he could never return to. But the applause that filled the room snapped him out of that private moment. It wasn't a quick clap or a polite one. It was real, full, and warm. People were standing now, stepping farther into the stage area with wide eyes and soft smiles. Some clapped slowly, as if not wanting to startle him. Others clapped with more enthusiasm, moved by what they had just witnessed. Daniel blinked, caught off guard. His hands trembled slightly as he pushed himself up from the bench. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. He wasn't used to people looking at him for anything other than where he needed to sweep or which trash bags needed changing. His first reaction was instinctive embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, his voice cracking a little. "I didn't mean to interrupt anything. I was just—" A woman near the front shook her head quickly. "No, don't apologize. Please don't." A man beside her added, "That was something else. You really play beautifully." Daniel looked down at his shoes, not knowing how to accept their words. Compliments felt strange to him now, like clothes he'd outgrown and wasn't sure how to wear anymore. The coordinator stepped forward with a gentle smile, not wanting to overwhelm him. "We didn't know you could play like that," she said. "I don't think any of us did." Daniel swallowed. He felt like every part of him was exposed, not in a harmful way, but in a way that made him feel strangely vulnerable. "It's been a while," he murmured. Lily moved to stand beside him, her hand gently wrapping around his arm. She looked up at him with a soft smile that said she was proud, really proud. That steadied him a little. One of the parents stepped forward, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "I've heard a lot of performances in this theater over the years," he said quietly. "But there was something different about yours. It felt real." Someone else added, "It felt like you were telling a story without saying a word." Daniel wasn't sure how to respond to that. He had never been good at talking about himself, especially his music. So he only nodded awkwardly, still feeling like the floor might swallow him. But the crowd didn't push him with more questions. Instead, they simply stood there, giving him room to breathe while letting their admiration fill the space. The coordinator looked at him thoughtfully. "You know," she said slowly, "we have a spot open in the program for the community showcase next month. We've been looking for something special to close the event with." Daniel froze again. The coordinator continued. I don't suppose you'd consider performing? Just one piece. Nothing too demanding. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I don't know, he said honestly. I just played something because my daughter asked me to. I wasn't trying to. You don't have to decide tonight, she said, raising a hand gently. But think about it. The door is open if you want it. Lily looked up at him again, eyes brightening at the idea. He could see how much the thought excited her, but she didn't say anything. She didn't want to push him. A teen who had watched quietly from the side stepped forward. If you performed, he said shyly, I think a lot of people would come just to hear you. You're really good. Daniel offered a small, unsure smile. Thank you, he said softly, though the words felt clumsy. The applause slowly died down as people started gathering their belongings. Some waved goodbye. Some gave him small nods of respect. A few parents approached him quietly and thanked him again before leaving. When the room began to clear, Daniel finally let out the breath he had been holding. The quiet that replaced the applause felt heavy but comforting. He turned to Lily. Are you okay? He asked. She laughed softly. I should be asking you that. He rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't expect all that. I know, she said. But you handled it. He didn't feel like he had handled it. Not really. But he appreciated her words. They walked toward the exit slowly, letting the night air cool their faces when they stepped outside. The parking lot lights cast soft shadows on the pavement, and the sky above was dark and quiet. As if giving him space to think, he unlocked their old car, and Lily climbed in, but before he started the engine, he just sat there for a moment. Lily watched him. Dad, he exhaled. It feels strange, he said quietly. Having people listen like that. Strange good or strange bad? She asked. He thought for a moment. A little of both. She nodded. I think that's okay. He smiled faintly. Yeah, maybe it is. The drive home was calm. Lily kicked off her shoes and curled up in the passenger seat, humming the melody he played earlier. Daniel listened, surprised that she remembered it well enough to hum it. Was it something you made up? She asked suddenly. It was something your mom used to love, he said softly. She didn't say anything at first. I wish I could have heard her hear it, she whispered. Daniel glanced at her. She would have loved that you were there tonight. Lily looked out the window. Her voice was gentle when she said, I think she was. He didn't argue. He wanted to believe that when they reached home, Lily went straight to her room to get ready for bed. Daniel stayed in the living room, sitting on the old couch that creaked whenever he leaned back. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. He stared at his hands. They still tingled slightly from playing. He flexed his fingers, wondering how something so familiar could also feel so distant. Could he really perform on a stage again? Could he really let people see that part of him? This part he had buried so deeply, he almost forgot what it felt like. He wasn't sure, but he also couldn't ignore how alive he'd felt while playing. How the notes seemed to lift something heavy from his shoulders, even if only for a few minutes. Lily peeked into the living room. You okay? She asked. He nodded slowly. Just thinking. She stepped inside and sat next to him. If you don't want to perform at the showcase, you don't have to, she said gently. I'm happy you played it all. That's enough for me. Daniel looked at her face earnest, soft, and full of love. I know, he said, but I don't want to make decisions out of fear anymore. She waited quietly. I've been hiding from music, he said quietly. Hiding from parts of myself. Maybe tonight was a sign, she whispered. He smiled faintly. Maybe it was. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm proud of you. Those words made something in his chest loosen. Later, after she went to bed, he walked into the hallway and opened the small storage closet where he kept old belongings. On the top shelf was a dusty box he hadn't touched in years. He pulled it down carefully. Inside were sheet music books, loose papers, and an old metronome that hadn't ticked in a long time. He ran his fingers over the pages, remembering nights when music had filled their home, long before worry and exhaustion replaced it. He sat on the floor and let the memories wash over him, not painfully this time, but gently. He stayed there for a long while, flipping through pages, tracing notes with his fingertips, humming soft melodies he once knew by heart. By the time he returned to his room, the house was silent and still. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the audience, the applause, the surprise on their faces, the warmth in their voices. He thought about the coordinator's invitation, and he thought about Lily's smile before he drifted off to sleep. One quiet thought settled in his mind. Amandi thought he was finally ready to consider. Maybe it was time to stop running from the music. The morning after the unexpected performance, the house felt different. It wasn't louder or brighter, but lighter somehow, as if a weight that had been pressing on the walls had finally been lifted. Daniel woke earlier than usual, long before his alarm, his mind already awake, even though his body begged for more sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his face with both hands. The night before replayed in his mind, moment by moment, the way the music had steadied him. The shock of seeing the crowd, the applause that felt unreal. The coordinator's invitation, Lily's pride when she looked at him. It all felt like something he might have dreamed. Except the feelings were too real to ignore. In the kitchen, he brewed a pot of coffee, the smell filling the quiet morning air. He stood by the small window, mug in hand, watching the sun peek over the neighborhood rooftops. His thoughts drifted back to the box of sheet music he had opened the night before. He hadn't touched those pages in years. And yet, when his fingers brushed over them, it felt like something familiar had stirred, like a voice calling him back. He didn't know if he was ready for the showcase. He didn't even know if he wanted to perform again. But he knew one thing. He couldn't pretend last night hadn't happened. Something inside him had shifted. Lily walked into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, hair messy from sleep. She yawned and sat at the table. "Morning," she mumbled. "Morning," he replied gently. She looked at him carefully. "You're thinking a lot." "I can tell." He chuckled softly. "Is it that obvious? You always stare out the window when you're thinking too much." He nodded, knowing she was right. "I'm just trying to understand everything that happened." "It was a big night," she said. "For you and for everyone who heard you." He took a slow sip of coffee. "What did you think about it?" "I think?" She paused, choosing her words. "I think you found something you didn't know you lost." He looked at her, surprised by her insight. "Maybe I did. Are you going to perform at the showcase?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat across from her and folded his hands on the table. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I know," she said softly. "But I'm also thinking, maybe being scared isn't always a reason to stop." Her eyes brightened. "So you're thinking about doing it?" He smiled a little. "I'm thinking about trying." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'll be there. I promise." He nodded. Her support meant more than she could ever know. Over the next few days, life returned to its rhythm, but something lingered beneath the surface. At work, Daniel found himself humming melodies while sweeping. Sometimes he paused near the piano when no one was around, touching the keys softly before forcing himself back to work. The coordinator approached him one evening while he was mopping the hallway. "No pressure," she said gently. "But have you thought more about the showcase?" He wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm. "A little," he said honestly. "We'd really love to have you. The community would too." "I'm not sure I'm ready," he admitted. "It's been a long time." She nodded understandingly. Sometimes the things we walk away from the longest are the ones waiting to bring us back. He didn't answer, but her words stayed in his mind long after she walked away. That night at home, he took out the old box again. He sat cross-legged on the living room floor as he sifted through the sheets. One particular piece caught his eye, a handwritten arrangement he had created years ago. His wife had loved it. He stared at the notes, remembering her smile. Slowly, he placed the sheet on the coffee table, took a deep breath, and imagined playing it again. His fingers twitched slightly, itching to move across the keys. "Dad?" Lily's voice drifted from down the hallway. He looked up. "Yeah?" She stepped closer and sat beside him. "You're going to do it, aren't you?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I think so." Her face lit up in a way that warmed his chest. "I knew you would." The weeks leading up to the showcase were filled with quiet practice sessions. Daniel didn't play in public. He wasn't ready for that. Instead, after his shift ended each night, he stayed behind for an hour to practice in the empty theater. The building was silent, except for the soft echo of the piano. Sometimes the notes faltered when memories became too heavy. Other times, the music flowed so naturally, he forgot to be afraid. The coordinator occasionally heard him from her office and smiled quietly to herself. She didn't interrupt, not wanting to disturb the fragile courage he was rebuilding. Meanwhile, Lily would sit in the front row, wrapped in a blanket with a thermos of hot chocolate, watching him, cheering him on silently. "You sound better every day," she would tell him. He always smiled shyly, never quite believing it, but night after night, he kept going. Finally, the evening of the showcase arrived. The theater buzzed with excitement. Families filled the seats, students chatted backstage, and volunteers set up props and equipment. The entire place felt alive. Daniel stood backstage, hands slightly trembling. He wasn't wearing anything fancy, just clean clothes, a neat shirt, and the same quiet presence he carried everywhere. Lily stood beside him, straightening the collar of his shirt. "You look perfect." She said, "I look nervous." Corrected. "Both things can be true," she replied with a teasing smile. He took a deep breath as the coordinator approached. "You're closing the show," she told him with a gentle smile. "People are excited to hear you." His heart thudded in his chest. "I hope I don't disappoint." "You won't," she said simply. Piece by piece, the performances unfolded, kids singing, teens dancing, small groups acting out short scenes. The audience clapped warmly after each one. Backstage, Daniel could hear the crowd, but couldn't see them, which somehow made it easier and harder at the same time. Lily stood with him until it was his turn. "I'll be right in the front row," she said softly. "Just look at me if you get nervous." He nodded, grateful. Then his name was announced. The audience quieted. The stage lights dimmed. Daniel stepped out. The brightness of the lights made it hard to see faces, but he could sense the full room watching him. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. For a moment, he wanted to turn around, to run backstage, to pretend none of this had ever happened. Then he saw Lily front row, hands clasped, eyes full of belief. He sat at the piano. He placed the handwritten arrangement on the stand. He inhaled deeply, and then he began to play. The first notes were soft, almost shy. But as the melody grew, so did his confidence. His fingers moved more freely, gliding with familiarity. The music flowed through the room like a gentle wave. People leaned forward in their seats, pulled in by the emotion behind each note. He wasn't just playing a piece. He was sharing a part of himself he had kept hidden for years. Halfway through, he closed his eyes. He wasn't in the theater anymore. He was back in his living room years ago, his wife humming beside him, Lily dancing clumsily in circles as a toddler. His chest,